Who are you? You don't know? Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history? What did the man do to make you as dumb as you are right now?
The African slave trade. Much of the so-called African slave trade was fabricated and widely exaggerated. There was no trade. An independent source showing that the so-called Indians on the eastern seaboard, also called Terra Nova or Moors, is called the book African and Native Americans by Jack D. Forbes. He shows in the book how many so-called Native American Indians were sold into slavery in Africa and Europe. This is the opposite direction in which we were taught the slave trade went. These Native Americans or Indians were classified as Negroes and blacks in the slave books of Seville, Spain and elsewhere, where they seem to show up in the slave markets as Negroes. These are major contradictions to the whole slave trade myth. Blacks were always in America. The missing Indians are Negroes. The slaves sold on the slave markets in the South were initially the black people from right here in this hemisphere. As they took the lands here, they enslaved the inhabitants of those lands who were black. The tens of millions of Americans, so-called Indians, who disappeared after 1492 did not all die in the Holocaust inflicted within America. Many thousand were sent to Europe and Africa as slaves. The whole slave trade myth is that the whole story was given to us in reverse. A mass colony of Africans were not shipped from Africa to America, but the truth is that black Indians were shipped from America to Europe. They were then shipped from Spain to Africa as a commodity for African resources. These black Indians, now mistaken as Africans, were shipped back to America and classified as African slaves. This part of our history is what the school systems failed to mention in their history programs. Am I saying that there was no slave trade? There was indeed a kidnapping of Africans from Africa to America. However, it was the result of the mass shipment and slaughter of the Moors in America at the hands of the Columbus expeditions. All of these tribes were originally black tribes of the Yamasee. And as far as the Yamasee mixing with the African slaves, the Yamasee and African runaways had a few things in common. They were both of the same ethnic background, they were able to blend in with each other, and they both had hatred for the British. Throughout slavery, thousands of African slaves escaped the plantations and sought refuge with the neighboring Native American tribes. The natives had an incredible knowledge of outdoor survival and location. It is often believed that Harriet Tubman herself, who freed slaves via the Underground Railroad, was herself a black Native American because of her knowledge of the paths and the terrain. You may wonder, are there any black tribes left? There is a woman named Verdiachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay, and she's the legal heir by blood to the Mason Rouge land grants that were willed to her by her great-great-grandfather Henry Turner. Verdiachi's land is the District of Louisiana, which is named after her great-great-great-grandfather's friend Louis Bourguignon, who sold the land to Joseph de Maison Rouge in 1795. Joseph had a daughter named Anne, in which the land went to her. Annie named the land Louisiana after Louis and Annie. In 1848, the U.S. government took the Turners to court to take the District of Louisiana. However, the government lost, and the land was granted to the heirs of Henry Turner, Verdiachi, Washita Turner, Gaston L. Bay. Verdiachi has set up a sovereign nation of Washita Moors that is recognized by the United States government. The U.S. government does not own the District of Louisiana, as we may believe. Also, the state of Georgia is owned by a Yamasee. It is documented. It's a natural Native American culture. It is just as important for Native Americans to understand true history as it is for Black Americans to understand true history. Blacks have been convinced that they are all ex-African slaves. Of course, this is a lie. There have been blacks in this country for thousands of years before the first Europeans. There are millions of blacks in America today who, if they trace their family heritage back, will not find any African slavery in their family. Many blacks are children of the Yamasee, Seminole, Creek, Cherokee, Blackfoot, Shoshone, etc. However, the U.S. government, in order to protect their best interests, has kept most of this information and true history from us. The U.S. government has convinced us to classify ourselves as a title that the European political system created in order to place us in a certain social bracket, African American. As an African American, we have no inalienable or indigenous rights under the Constitution. Even worse, as an African American Christian, we dig an even deeper hole for ourselves. Thus, we sever any connection to sovereignty or self-identity. As African American Christians, we literally become dependent on the government and relinquish all indigenous and self-governing classifications. Thus, we throw ourselves on the mercy of the U.S. judicial system. Native Americans have what is called autonomy or self-government, similar to diplomatic immunity. As indigenous people, we have the right to set up our own sovereign nations. We govern our own judicial, legislative, and penal system. As African Americans, we waive the right of self-governing and indigenous rights by admitting that we are immigrants, came over from somewhere else, and not indigenous.
Oh, I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. This is what he does.